So guys, today we're going to talk about load-bearing walls and beams. Now, you ever wonder how to determine whether a beam in the house or a wall in the house is load-bearing or not? We had an Instagram follower write in and ask us that very question, so I thought it'd be a great topic to talk about. So think about any house as a box, right? All the exterior walls are technically load-bearing in one way or form. Some of them, depending on where the roof transcends, that's going to be more weight-bearing than what we call the gable ends or the triangle or the flat side of the house. But basically all exterior walls are in some way, shape, or form load-bearing walls. But the ones people are mostly asking about is walls they might want to take down between a kitchen and a living room, between a kitchen and a dining room, or to open up a basement. And you can't always tell without cutting a hole in sheetrock and doing an exploratory. But architects usually know, and builders usually know, and there's a trick to it. And I'm going to show you that trick when we go downstairs to look at the basement. All right, so going along with today's themes about load-bearing walls and beams, what you need to know about is the different type of beams you may need if you want to remove a wall. Because it's not just one type of beam. It's all based on span and load. So the wider the span and the heavier of the load above it, the bigger the beam you need. So if you're just opening up a doorway to 5 feet and above it is an attic, there's really not a lot of weight in an attic, so you don't need a big beam. But if you're taking a 20-foot garage expansion and removing a column that used to be here, you need a big beam. And this particular beam up here happens to be what we call a laminate beam. So it's layers of wood glued together that are stronger than natural wood itself. And depending on that span and that load determined by the architect, that determines the thickness and the height of the beam, and whether you can hide it in the ceiling or it has to be below the ceiling like you see here, which is a drop beam. So beam number one, and the most common beam we use when we're taking down a column or a load-bearing wall, is a laminate beam. But when we go downstairs, we're going to show you 3 other versions of beams or girders that are used in construction, whether it's from new construction or when you have to remove something. So let's go take a look. All right, guys, you've been waiting, so now I'm going to show you the trick to determine if a wall up inside your house is load-bearing or not. Now, the disclaimer, I am not a licensed architect. I am not a licensed structural engineer. I'm just a general contractor with a lot of experience. Don't go taking down any wall in your house without checking with a professional to make sure that the wall is not load-bearing. Don't go by just the tricks in this video because it doesn't apply 100% of the time. All right, disclaimer over, let's talk. The trick is, load and span and beams in house translate from the 2nd or 3rd floor all the way down to the basement, usually. So the rule of thumb is at least 80% of the time, if there's a girder and columns in your basement, the wall directly above that is the load-bearing wall. So when you're standing in your house and you're trying to figure out, is this wall between my kitchen and my dining room load-bearing, or is the wall between the kitchen and the living room load-bearing? Find out where that wall is, go down in the basement, and see below it. If there's a girder with lolly columns, which is the most common way to support a girder in a basement, then this wall is the load-bearing wall and will probably be the load-bearing wall all the way up through the 1st and 2nd floors. That's the trick. But while we're down here, we're going to show you the other types of beams that are used in construction. So let me show you over here first. This is probably what's in your basement right now if you live in the Northeast. This is a standard triple 2x10 regular framing lumber, and this is what they used as the main girder to support the load all the way up in houses for standard construction. There's usually no need to put a laminate beam or a steel beam in standard moderate size home construction. So this is probably what you have right now in your own house. Now, some people, when we finish their basements, they look at these columns and they say, well, I can't put a couch, I can't fit the pool table, I can't fit the ping pong table. I want this to be a much more open play area. Well, this triple 2x10 that we're talking about isn't strong enough to span the entire basement without these columns. So if you want the column to go away, this has to be changed to this. This is a steel I-beam. This one happens to be called a W840. So that has to do with the weight that it carries and the width of it, W8, 8-inch steel I-beam. In order to remove what was a column over here, we had to have the architect and engineer spec out this steel I-beam so that now this new heavier beam can support a longer span for the load we talked about upstairs. So if you need to remove columns in your basement, there's a good chance you're going to need steel. And now, in between the old school girder we talked about and the big steel beam that we talked about, and we talked about the parallam beam that you saw upstairs, there's also one other thing we could do if we need to beef up a beam without going to a very expensive steel I-beam, and that's called a flitch plate. Come over here. I don't know if you can see up here, but this was the original triple 2x10 girder. And this particular section of the house had a lot heavier load to just leave the triple girder. So the engineer spec'd out a 1/2-inch plate of steel to be bolted to each side of the girder to make that old 2x10 girder even stronger. So that's another way we can remedy an existing girder without having to remove it and put in steel, is we use flitch plates. Sometimes they're even in between the girders, but when we're adding them to an existing girder, they're usually bolted to the outside. So that's beams 101. You have the standard 2x10 or 2x8 girder. You have flitch plates to reinforce those existing girders. You have lam beams to replace those girders if you want to remove a column or a load-bearing wall. And in really large spans and loads, we go to steel beams. So as always, thanks for watching. If you have a topic you'd like us to cover, write it in the comments, send me a DM, and we'll do a video about what you want to hear about, not just what we think you want to hear about. We'll catch you on the next one.